just that you're going to be invisible.
I had that uncomfortable feeling of, oh, we probably should have started doing this earlier.
A lot of mentions do come from other marketing channels that are not SEO based.
500 mentions nobody actually reads.
On a particular article, is it cited in AI? And there are quite a few articles that pop up around the same time mentioning you in a negative way.
It's still socially acceptable spying. Yes, I'm sorry, I was wrong, you're right.
Hallucinations and misinformation can happen. Yeah.
We're no longer optimizing just pages, we're also optimizing narratives.
This is Adsy Talks. Adsy Talks. Adsy Talks.
Welcome to Adsy Talks. This is another episode of our podcast, The Conversations with People Who Are Shaping the Future of Search. I'm Anthony, Head of Customer Experience at Adsy, content marketing platform. Today, I'm joined by someone who is quietly redefining what visibility even means in AI era. Despina Gavoyannis, Senior SEO Specialist in Ahrefs. Despina, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to chat with you about SEO and where it's heading.
Thank you so much. Also, I have to say, then when another Ahrefs article starts circulating in Slack channels, you know something serious is happening. So, yeah, today we will talk about it. So let's jump right in. Your article, How to Audit Brand Mentions for Modern SEO, really resonated with me, especially the idea that brand mentions are to AI search what backlinks were to traditional SEO. So, and honestly, when I read that line, I had that uncomfortable feeling of, oh, we probably should have started doing this earlier. So let's dig into it. What originally pushed you to look at brand mentions as a priority in SEO audits?
Well, to be honest, a lot of people actually do get brand mentions, even if they don't get links, like people still talk about them. And there's a lot of publications that have a policy where they don't link out, even if they do mention. So I think most brands are going to find that they do have a lot of mentions. And up until now for SEO, a lot of those were ignored because they didn't have a link. But I think what changed and where my interest in it came from was with these talks about semantic SEO, which have been around in SEO for many years. But the shift with AI, which are based purely on semantics and meaning and the context around text and language, that I think is what made everything different in SEO, in the sense of like, we now have technology that actually can understand the context of those mentions way more. It's not just the fact that your brand was included in a conversation or in an article, it's also in what way was it included? Is it a positive, neutral, or negative kind of mention? And also, what other information went around it that can also be isolated by AI and actually it influences what AI can now say about you. That's what's different. It's not just if you have it, but it's also how does it actively shape what is said about you in search. And I think that's the really cool thing, the new frontiers, so to speak, of search, that we're now redefining what it means in SEO to care about how we are shown in search, not just if we're shown. Does that make sense? Like with where like my interest in everything comes from and how others in SEO they're also seeing that too, right? I'm not the only one who's like focusing on the why behind it all. Why we do what we do now has a bigger impact in AI and responses too, I feel.
So now it's not just where you mentioned, but how and why you mentioned, which already
Absolutely.
sounds a lot closer how humans judge brands, not just algorithms. Mhm.
Yes.
And when we talk about brand mentions today, we're looking at way more than just a name on page. How do you personally distinguish high volume from basic citation or standard backlink?
That is a really great question. It's first of all, there's a lot of human instinct that goes into this right now. We don't necessarily have all of the tools to and I don't think even search engines have all of the tools to be able to say this is a really great mention and this isn't. So when we look at human instinct, what we kind of look at are things like is this mention relevant to the brand? Is it on a respected, trusted website? Will it build a brand's authority? Does it add value to their reputation? Is it something that, oh, of course, the sentiment, is it a positive or neutral sentiment? So it positively builds that reputation instead of negatively building it? And also the surrounding context. Is it just like a name just chucked in a paragraph that also mentions 10 other brand names? Or is it a paragraph that is solely about that, or even the whole article about that brand? So the context around it can also shape um, the the level of authority that is perceived by that mention too. And I think like we're going to see a lot more SEO platforms and tools focusing on these like the more qualitative elements, because so far how we track backlinks has been very quantitative. Like we look at all of the numbers and the metrics around a backlink. But I think these qualitative elements that give us clues as to the context, that's going to be more important.
I see. So, yeah, basically, as you compare, the brand mentions are becoming to AI-driven search, what backlinks were to traditional SEO. And can you walk us through how large language models actually use this mention to understand a brand's authority?
Yeah, to a degree. I'm not an AI engineer, but so far my understanding of looking at AI search and how LLMs and AI technology is used in that, mentions are like they're used as a pattern in a large data set. So we have to kind of understand that these systems have access to billions of documents and all the text within them. So, and what they're looking for are patterns that they can make sense of. And so brand mentions, like a single brand mention on its own, is not enough to form a pattern. So once we have a lot of brand mentions and those patterns can be extracted from the content, from that data, that's how they can then use those patterns that they identify about a brand. And that's how then they know what to kind of say and how to represent a brand too. So it's not necessarily like it is a numbers game in that you need a lot of mentions, but it's not necessarily that you need 200 mentions or 500 mentions and then you're okay. It's you kind of need enough mentions to make that pattern. And in different industries, different size brands, it's going to be different. So, for example, brands that, companies that are publicly traded companies, they're going to get a lot more brand mentions naturally because they're talked about in financial articles and news and that kind of thing versus brands that aren't at that level. Small businesses don't need as many brand mentions as like SaaS companies or online companies that target an international audience. So those kind of factors also play into how many mentions you kind of need. So it's that understanding of how much how many mentions influence the LLMs to understand the patterns of what people think about you. And a lot of times it's also not necessarily just what you think about yourself, but what other trusted sources say about you. And if you don't have enough of those, that can be in a pattern in itself. So the absence of trustworthy brand mentions becomes a pattern because if your competitors have it and you don't, that's a gap that can be, well, it's not necessarily that it's going to negatively influence what AI says about you. It's just that you're going to be invisible. That's the trade off there. So, in both aspects, whether you have a lot or you don't have a lot, but your competitors do, those patterns and how those models and algorithms figure them out, because there's a lot of math that goes behind the scenes that I don't think as SEOs we fully can appreciate or understand the depth of it, right? So if we see that it's a game of probabilities, and understanding patterns from very large data sets. If we understand it that way, then we can understand how we can influence and what parts of it we can influence safely as well.
I see. So basically, this explains why two brands with identical backlink profiles can feel completely different in AI answers.
Absolutely. Because you've also got like what UGC, what people say on Reddit and social media, that comes into it as well. So if you've got hypothetically, because I don't think in the real world we can necessarily get this to be an exact experiment we can do, but hypothetically, let's say you had two brands with exact same link profiles and all the numerical stats were the same. But one of those brands had a stronger reputation or a bigger audience that talked about them and engaged with them. in a positive way, let's say, that brand is going to have more mentions and more brand signals than the brand that just focuses on classic SEO signals. And I think we see this a lot in like affiliate marketing, because a lot of affiliate marketers didn't treat their websites like real brands. They did all the technical SEO elements, they got the links and made sure all those elements were okay, but they didn't necessarily build the audience. They didn't have a lot of people talking about their brand, right? So I think people who have done SEO in that sense where they didn't really consider brand are probably feeling the effects of these changes because they didn't have those mentions that occur naturally when you have an audience as well.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that, and we will talk about that as well a bit later. Right now, like as a next step, I want to talk about the audit and the framework. So every good audit starts with benchmarking. And what are the core metrics that give us the most honest picture of where a brand actually starts right now? And I mean honest, not this looks good in report version.
Yeah, that is a very great question. I think a lot of people are asking this, even people who are not in SEO teams like brand and PR specialists as well. Uh, it can be tricky. Like, unless you have a single source of truth and as an organization you say these are the metrics we care about, different teams can use different metrics. I think the first step in any brand mentions audit or any kind of audit really is to establish that baseline. Personally, I'm leaning towards Ahrefs' brand radar, and I have metrics that I use that signal things like your mention acquisition rate, not necessarily like the number of how many mentions you have. That's important. And to see that it's growing, that's also important. But also, you want to see how fast it's growing. It's kind of, if we liken it to backlinks, it would be like your link velocity. How quickly were you getting new links? That's the idea with mentions as well. Like, are you being mentioned more over time? You know, and is that growing? Another one is kind of like correlating spikes in your mentions with other marketing activities, because a lot of mentions do come from other marketing channels that are not SEO based. So, for example, if you work for a big company that did like a billboard campaign or ads or radio, things like that, that could influence mentions in media as well. So, understanding what your organization is already doing, and so what you'd be tracking there is, did we get a large spike in mentions? And just cross-checking to see, is it actually because of an SEO thing or is it because of like a marketing thing? And if it is not because of an SEO thing, just to know that and to keep track of that in your dashboards so you then don't then go off and like make incorrect assumptions about what's working, what's not working. So keeping tabs on, the bigger picture of it. I think also the estimated organic traffic that the pages that mention you, so you can get an idea of what are the impressions that these mentions are actually making? Now, this one here won't necessarily indicate how well you're going to go in search, but if you care about visibility to your audience and search everywhere optimization, the idea that SEO is expanding just beyond Google and to everywhere people looking for information, which can include other platforms. So if that idea resonates with you and your team, then you want to be looking at the impressions that you're getting from everywhere that you're being featured. Like, what impact does that make on your brand awareness, your brand authority, and that kind of thing, to understand how valuable were these mentions in terms of audience. But then you also maybe want to see how valuable were these mentions in terms of AI citations as well. And this is something I really like in Brand Radar, is that you can put any brand in there and see how many times they're mentioned in AI responses, even from websites that are not their own. And I think that's the really key thing here when we're talking about mentions across the web, is how do those mentions shape your visibility in AI? So those metrics around your citations within AI results that don't come from your brand, that shows you which of those mentions make a big impact in AI. So there's quite a few there, depending on what kind of angle you take, because some smaller teams, they may not be doing, a lot of those bigger brand marketing campaigns. So for them, they might not see as many spikes affecting their brand mentions based on marketing campaigns that they're doing. But I think for small teams, it still matters to them that they do see a growth, that they are acquiring new mentions online, and that keeps growing over time, because this isn't something you do for 1 month and then you're done. You need to keep it going every month, and you need to see it growing every month. So I think anything that gives you that picture month over month, that you're growing, that you're accelerating, that it's going in the direction you want to go, and that the other correlations with it, that it's also correlating in more visibility in AI results as well, things like that, over time, that will show you the pattern of it's working.
I like how you mentioned unique pages in organic search, because a lot of teams, they just stop at raw counts, and which is how we end up celebrating 500 mentions nobody actually reads.
Yes.
Yeah, and also, as you mentioned, not all mentions are critically equal. How do you filter through the noise to identify mentions that are actually shaping how AI system perceive your brand?
Oh, that's a really great question. Thanks for asking it. I think, people who are thinking along these lines are definitely going deeper rather than just like, "Oh, yeah, let's get our brand mentioned wherever." Because, for me, I look at the mentions that are making the most impact, like real impact for a brand. It's very difficult to measure return on investment. So I don't think this is the type of activity where you can get it to some kind of revenue metric, which is where I go first. I don't think this is the case here with brand mentions. So I think in this case, I think we do need to look at, does the brand mention on a particular article, is it cited in AI? I think that's the very first place. If I were doing this for a real brand today, right now, that's the first thing I would look at. Because then I could measure not just that AI is using it as a data source, but also what kind of information is it taking from that article, and how is that affecting the representation of the brand? It's not the if you're being cited, but also how you're being cited. That's really critical here, because if you're mentioned in an article, but in a really negative way, and there are quite a few articles that pop up around the same time mentioning you in a negative way, then that will affect how you're being seen in AI responses from the time those mentions happen onwards. So that matters. So I think for me, that's where I would start, is check out the mentions that directly influence how AI talks about you, that directly influence your brand's visibility in search as a whole, in AI overviews, in AI mode, ChatGPT, Perplexity, all of those, but also in traditional Google results, because a lot of those are now also pulling AI, like frequently asked questions that people also ask bit in Google results. That also uses AI these days. So check out both in classic search and in AI search, and see which mentions are affecting how your brand is represented and which ones are affecting it in a way that you don't like specifically, because those are the ones you need to do something about, like as a priority. It's okay if, someone in Whoop Whoop says something bad about you that no one cares about and AI doesn't read, that doesn't matter. But if AI is reading it and AI is pulling that information into its responses, that matters a lot. And I think that's my yardstick for how I prioritize.
I think this is where SEO starts to overlap with the reputation management, whether we like it or not. We often obsess over new links, but what about mentions that we lose? How much damage does a disappearing high quality mention actually do in a modern search?
Yeah, it's kind of really hard to say right now, because search is changing so quickly and you can lose visibility for so many different reasons. We are not able to trace it back to like one specific mention like we used to. But I think it's something that I would definitely be keeping my eye on, because in a similar way to how like most SEO professionals would keep track of losing backlinks over time, and then correlating that with significant drops in their search visibility for whatever reason, I do think that especially with AI, if you lose a mention on an article that was being cited quite a lot, then that would probably have a direct influence on you not being cited in those responses that um, not being mentioned in the responses that cite that article anymore. So if they've replaced you with a competitor, or if they've dropped the mention for because they rewrote the article for any reason, there are just web upkeep kind of reasons that you can lose mentions for. It gives you an opportunity to reach out to them and negotiate another placement. Or if it is, for example, because you've lost to a competitor, it gives you an opportunity to understand your weaknesses in market perception. And that's like a bigger issue, I think. So it is definitely worth keeping an eye on. I don't know at the moment if it will necessarily be a one-to-one correlation where you lose a significant mention and you'll see the drop right away. I think it's a pattern that you need to observe over time.
I see. So it's less see it and forget it, and more check if we're still alive. I see. And earlier you mentioned about the competitors, and I want to focus a bit on this one. Um, how does analyzing a competitor's mention profile change the way we look at our own gaps? Is there a way to reverse engineer their success in AI results?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like how you would do like a gap analysis, for backlinks, how you would put you versus your competitor and you would see what links they have that you don't have. You can do a very similar thing with AI results. And you can say mainly on who's mentioned them that gets featured in AI results, but they don't mention you too. That's how you could look at it. So, for example, a lot of those like for SaaS companies, they have a lot of best software for XYZ. They get featured in those posts. So if you notice that your competitors are starting to show up in a lot of those and you're not, those would be opportunities that you could probably add to your outreach and start reaching out to those same companies because generally, if they're going to mention a bunch of competitors, they're writing about your industry, they're probably going to know who you are as well. And if they don't, it's a great opportunity to introduce yourself and start making new partners and relationships. Just depends on how big your business is and how new you are to the market to do something like that. I think the process for that, uh, using Ahrefs, you'd be able to do it in Brand Radar quite easily. You put in you versus your competitor, and it shows you the gaps between what responses and keywords they rank for versus what you rank for, and the differences that you can then um, yeah, you can also see, like, what topics and things like that. It goes down to that level, which is super cool. We didn't used to think about it this way for backlinks before, but now you can see, like, our competitors showing up for more specific topics that also relate to you, but could be a topic gap that you identify by doing this too. So, yeah, it's pretty cool thing to be able to do, and I think it is very important to keep an eye on that because the competitors who are gonna move faster and kinda create a bit of a moat in that they become more trusted sources, it'd be really hard to out outdo that, it's hard to earn more trust in a quantifiable way, than industry giants, so you wanna be actively working on that as soon as possible and, keeping track of that.
So basically, competitive analysis is still socially acceptable spying.
Well, yes, any SEO would tell you any SEO who tells you otherwise, I don't think you should trust. But, yeah, because it's not necessarily just that you're spying, it's also keeping track of AI and what are the opportunities that you can be represented in. If there's an opportunity for a competitor, there's
Mhm,
an opportunity for you.
of course.
So it's also that side of it, the more ethically acceptable version of it.
Yeah, and you've mentioned you've mentioned about mentions. There are some positive mentions and also negative mentions. If an AI model sees a lot of mentions associated with misinformation or negative feedback, how does that poisons brands present in AI overviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think necessarily that the LLMs and the AI systems know what's true and what's not about a brand. It's not kind of like, information in Wikipedia, for example, especially if it's like science or health related information that has years and years and like hundreds of experts who've all contributed to that knowledge. There's a consensus that forms around it. I don't think brands have that same kind of consensus. So it's really difficult for an AI model to know what's true and what's not. And so what they do is they look at what you say about yourself, but also what trusted independent sources say about you. And in cases where they could think that there's like a potential conflict of interest, that you obviously want to represent yourself in a good light, but might be deceptive in doing so, they're going to trust the other sources that are independent of you. And so that could be UGC, it could be like what media publications say, it could be a collection of many of those things. And so in those cases, it's a really difficult thing for even a human sometimes to know what's true about a brand and what's not without that research of multiple kind of sources. So AI systems do a similar thing.
Yeah, so
Uh,
for AI, AI doesn't really do a benefit of a doubt as we do.
Not usually.
Mm,
Not
yes.
not in cases where the query, for example, for YMYL, where there's a high risk, where misinformation could cause harm to somebody, it won't do benefit of the doubt there. It will defer to expert consensus. And if we're talking about that, like AI will do what its engineers think it should do. And so, what its engineers think it should do, there are frameworks within the companies that build AI models that shape how they think, right? So, for example, at Google, if you read through the quality rater guidelines, you get a lot of insight about how they think through these kind of issues and why they will trust an independent source instead of trusting a brand. So, if they do that to evaluate EEAT, then their engineers probably do it in for their AI models and their algorithms as a framework as well, right? So if that's how they're thinking through who to trust, because it is a trust issue, then that is what will filter through into the technology as well. So if there's misinformation, that's on you as a brand to go and correct that. The AI won't have a mechanism to know, and it will default to what it thinks is the consensus about your brand based on the language patterns that it finds on what it thinks are trustworthy independent sources. There's a lot of what ifs in that though, which is why hallucinations and misinformation can happen um, within the AI system itself.
Yeah, sometimes I find myself correcting AI when I'm doing some research, and I like this standard phrase that it answered like, "Yes, I'm sorry, I was wrong. You are right." So it's so funny that when he is writing something that you asked him to do very specifically, and his response is irrelevant based on some hallucination or misinformation, he accepts your opinion and starts working around that as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of that defaulting to the user. But people have tried to game that a little bit to trick AI into believing what they're trying to tell it, which is a lie, and it catches on pretty quick. And I think that's because of the training data and all the patterns that it, can use, that it's getting better at not being caught out, not being gullible.
Yeah, it's all about like evolving and yeah. So the world of search is shifting so fast. Sometimes I feel we're like in a race, and this race is getting faster each year. And how do brand mentions influence AI-driven search and visibility overall?
Yeah, I think going back to something we mentioned earlier, it's kind of like that pattern of your brand mentions around the web. Those patterns are what influence your visibility in search. And so if those patterns are that you have a lot of positive mentions from, your users, your customers, people who've actually used your product and service, and you're also positively mentioned in the press, then you're going to build that reputation that becomes more trustworthy to AI as well. And then you'll hopefully see that your brand is included in more responses. There is a technical component, you still have to optimize your on page and do all the classic SEO things so that you're showing up for the right queries and topics. You still need to do that. But in terms of how brand mentions and the building of your authority and reputation, that makes you a more trustworthy source. That's what it does for you. And the more trust you earn in a way that machines can interpret, the better that'll be for you. It's not something you can switch on overnight, which is why it's becoming more important to do and to start as soon as possible, I think.
So we're no longer optimizing just pages. We're also optimizing narratives, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
brand narratives. I think for companies that already had branding teams, that's not a new conversation. Those branding teams have thought about the narratives, they thought about what, product categories and topics that they want that brand to be connected to. Because it's kind of like, when you're thinking about big brands that have branding teams, for example, let's just say HubSpot, they can connect to the topic of marketing, sure. But what most big brands do is that they find their angle, their unique selling point, the thing that makes them different, and they connect to that more closely. So for HubSpot, they got really well known for inbound marketing. It's also like Nike. Nike doesn't just sell shoes, they sell performance footwear. So it becomes very specific. Apple, they sell technology. Yes, they sell laptops and iPads and iPhones, but they center around the theme of innovation. They target a particular audience who cares about that element of it. And so that's like if we're talking about what product categories and like how you want to show up in AI, how people see you and the reputation that you build through their eyes will shape what AI also learns about you. And so the big brands, what they do is they shape that narrative first. Otherwise, if you don't shape your narrative, the people who interact with you will do that for you. And then if they start thinking of you in a particular way that you don't see yourself and you don't feel like that's right for your brand, you either have to meet them there or you have to do a lot of education of your audience of what you actually do so that the misinformation around what your brand does stops spreading. So that becomes like an active activity that you can do. And so I think that's really different into how SEO teams have typically thought because we haven't had to do any like messaging for a brand before. Yes, we create content. Yes, we even do web design, tweaking the home pages and about pages for EEAT. But I think this side of it is what's new. And the risk is that when, you do build brand mentions and get links, the context around that influences how you're perceived in search results now. We never used to care about that before. So I think that's why we need to care about it now is that messaging side of it is really important.
Speaking about the brands you've mentioned, one question I hear a lot is how can we influence what AI associates with our brand if we do not control third-party media?
That's a great question. Yeah, it can be hard. I think we have a level of control. We have a level of control, and I think brands always have because brands have been doing PR and putting out press releases. They do partnerships. They do, like they talk to influencers to shape their narrative. They also, as a brand, they also use their voice actively every single day in all the content they put out there, all their communications, how they represent themselves and what they want to be known for. Every touch point with a brand influences how their audience starts to see them. So those are very active ways where a brand can influence how it is shown on the rest of the internet as well, and also on the customer experience side, because that's where UGC content comes from. Users will generate content on Reddit to ask for recommendations and give recommendations, and it's usually based on their firsthand experience of a brand too. So looking at the customer experience and creating positive customer journeys so that they speak positively and spread word of mouth. I think that's always been a core staple of marketing, even before the internet became a thing. There's nothing that beats word of mouth marketing. So those are the elements that are within our control that filter out. But yes, there are elements people can go and say anything they want on the internet at any point in time, right? So it comes back to understanding that every brand is probably going to have some negative stuff said about them. As long as that's not the dominant pattern that is spoken about their brand, then that's normal. They're going to have some, people who are unhappy. They're going to have some reviews that are not going to be that great. That's normal. And brands can reply to those and share more context about what happened, replying in a professional manner. We do that in SEO anyway. We tell our local clients to reply to every negative review so that the future people reading it can understand the context behind that review. So that's also an element of reputation management that we already kind of do in SEO anyway. It's just becoming more aware of that and doing it in advance as much as possible by building a better business. Everyone is in business for a reason. People come to you and they buy stuff from you, and you stay in business the more that they buy from you because they want something specific from you. And the more you keep giving them the thing that they want in a way that they like receiving, the more your reputation will be positive and grow in the way that you want it to grow. And that's on you. If you're earning a really negative reputation, then that's on you too, because you're not doing the things that they want. That's why you're losing them as a business. That's why you might struggle as a business. So all of this comes back to your actions as a business, your actions as a brand, and how you interact with your audience and giving them what they want, which is kind of what we've always said in SEO. Give searchers what they want and you'll be rewarded. So it's like doing that at the business level now. We need to care about that more within SEO and represent what's happening at that level more through online medium, through the websites and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with you because when I joined Adsy, several years ago, one of the things that I mentioned is that we had our review platform. It have like average rating. I would say like it was quite low. And one of the things I noticed is that negative reviews rarely had any replies, any explanation of the situation. And while I was working with Etsy, I consistently replied to all the negative reviews, and in 90% of the cases, it was just a matter of very unsatisfied client who didn't get what they wanted, and they were very pissed. They wanted to share their negativity, and if after I contacted that client, we like reviewed the case, and it appeared not to be that crucial, not to be that critical. And uh, time after time, while I was working with negative reviews, the majority of them, they were edited, removed, because the case was solved, closed. And lately, Trustpilot introduced their like AI summary feature where they took all your reviews and wrote a short summary about you as a brand and how people perceive you. And I noticed that even if we get a negative review, we provide a very constructive reply to this review. Trustpilot no longer sees this review as very critical and very crucial. He just sees that there was a situation. The representative replied and explained why this happened and offered help, offered a solution. And in the end, it didn't influence negatively on our brand and how Trustpilot and other review platforms see us. So yes, this is something that I was doing before, not thinking about how AI thing. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to how to do business 101, right? Keeping your customers happy. Everything we're talking about comes back to that. As humans, we appreciate when we're heard and when our frustrations are met with in a reasonable professional manner. So when people give negative reviews, usually it's they want attention. They feel like they might have tried other avenues like going through support, emailing, and it didn't work. So they need the brand's attention. That's usually what it comes down to. So if you go back to Business 101, basics of how to keep your customers happy, then you can also that's the active stuff that you can do to manage your reputation online. Because most reasonable people, they won't go and leave a 1-star review for no reason, you know? Of course, reasonable people, right? Being a keyword there, because we do get the negative SEO attacks. But you can still, even around that, you can still influence how AI sees you simply by responding and adding that context. Giving it context, showing it, it's actually not that big of a deal. It was resolved professionally very quickly, and the customer was very happy afterwards. All of that ends up building your reputation, even if they started off with a 1-star review. I think that's really great that you did that and you noticed that. And more businesses need to do that. More SEO people need to help businesses to do that because they often don't know that these little actions can actually make such a big impact.
People want to be heard and understood, and the majority of the negative cases that I dealt with, they were successfully solved after we just walked through with this customer through the situation. And it appeared not that big of a deal, and that 1-star review was more emotional than actual review. So yeah, I do agree with you on that. And also, let's return a bit to yeah, because we slide away with this review thing. It resonates with me a lot because I'm working with customers on a everyday basis, and all these things are very close to me, and I feel their pain and our pain as well. Okay, so let's get practical here. How should modern marketing team be structured to handle brand mentions properly? I mean, is this strictly an SEO task, or does it require a full squad? That's a big mindset shift for companies still treating SEO as a silo.
Yeah, I think you work with what you've got. Some companies, they're small, they're lean, they don't have brand professionals, PR professionals, content professionals, everyone wears multiple hats. If that's the kind of company that you're in and you're an SEO professional, it's probably going to be on your shoulders. But if you do have those resources within the company, then it's probably like what we're seeing at Ahrefs is that a lot of brand professionals and PR professionals are actually using Brand Radar because they care about AI visibility and they care about mentions on the web. It's part of their day-to-day job to care about these things. So if you have those roles within your team, within your company structure already, then including them in what you do for SEO, I think 100% is going to be a great thing. So for me, I find that the trick so that you can get the best outcomes is when you do have those professionals, is that you only show them the 20% of SEO that actually affects them on a day-to-day basis. So say you've got like a PR professional, they're going out there getting brand mentions already. They were doing that before they even knew SEO was a thing. They were doing that before AI became a thing. So you find those little levers that if they became really good at doing those 20% of SEO things that actually influence what they do on a day-to-day basis, they just became really good at that. And then you do the same with the content marketers and you do the same with the brand professionals and the designers, whoever you've got on your team that is touching on these SEO points in their day-to-day life, then you're going to get a really good outcome across the whole organization. And they don't then feel like overwhelmed and confused by all the SEO stuff because honestly, a lot of SEO stuff they don't need to care about. You as the SEO professional need to care about the rest, but having their help, having them on board and educating them in that way of like, here's the few things, like if you're going to go out and get brand mentions anyway, consider the context in which they're mentioned. Try and get them in articles or on publications that talk about the topics and, the things that we care about as a brand. Also try and see if you can get like the sentence and the quotes that surround our brand mention. Try and mention these kind of key phrases in there. Very small stuff. Like it's just slightly changing what they're already doing. It's an easy ask. So that's how you kind of integrate more of that into a team when you already have one. If you're the only person doing that, you need to wear all the hats. You need to be the PR person. If you're doing all the link building, then you're doing all the PR as well. Like those two things go hand in hand, because if you were doing link building and had a PR person, chances are you two have already talked and coordinated efforts to some degree anyway. So you just keep coordinating efforts. You keep doing what you're doing, adding the new things that now influence AI and making it as easy as possible for more people in the organization to join you on that mission of improving the organization's visibility in AI in the ways that they can. I think that's like going to be more critical, that cross-functional collaboration between teams.
Speaking about teamwork, there's one question that I have to ask. It's a very typical question, but very important. For teams just getting started, which tools would you recommend for brand mention audits? I mean, like especially for teams that do not have this enterprise level resources yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like at a very basic level, you go with free tools that you can get like Google Alerts or Ahrefs Alerts, where you set it up and say, anytime my brand is mentioned on the internet, let me know. So those are free. You can do them. You'll get emails every time it's mentioned, and you can, configure your settings for how many emails you get, so you don't get overwhelmed by like a million emails in one day, kind of thing. You start there, and then over time, I don't think necessarily that you need to like open every email and do a lot of activity with it. You just keep tabs and see patterns that emerge over time. Oh, like, we just did like a major push and we started getting a lot of mentions when we do this activity. So you start noticing just intrinsically patterns that emerge. What kind of mentions are you getting? What kind of activities are you doing in your business that lead to those mentions? You start figuring out those patterns. Start there. But then you do eventually need to probably build into more tools. So if you've got an SEO tool, start using it and looking at the backlink data, because that's going to correlate to where you're getting mentioned. If you've got a link, you've got a mention. It's not going to be 100% perfect in terms of capturing every mention and the data around all of that, but it's generally more accessible to most teams that are starting out, because backlinks have been measured and tracked for more than a decade now. I think closer to 15 years with many SEO tools. So there's going to be a lot more robust technology there that won't cost as much at the enterprise level. But then, of course, if you are in a big organization that does have the budget, then you probably would want to invest in those enterprise level brand. Yeah, it is. The amount of data that you'd need to collect to track at that level is insane. So if you want that level, then it does come with a price tag, but I think it's well worth it for the brands that care about it. If they care about it, they're gonna invest in it, But you've got multiple options from free to paid depending on where your team's at and where your priorities lie with it. Yeah.
And Despina, I want to wrap this up on a philosophical question because I think it's all about like dreaming and overseeing of what is going to happen. If we look at where search is going, what's the one comfortable lie SEOs are still telling themselves about brand authority that will be completely debunked by this time, let's say next year?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's already in the process of being debunked, but for me, I'd say it's that the lie would be that they keep doing SEO the way they've already been doing without building a brand. So if you're building a website, kind of like how most people build affiliate marketing websites, and you think you can still get away with it without building a brand because you know some kind of cheats or hacks to bypass all of those brand authority metrics that AI and search now kind of require to some degree, doing fake EEAT. Whatever cheat you think you've got, I think that's the lies that it'll keep working for you. I don't think it will. I think to some degree, those people who are chasing cheats and hacks will have to constantly chase cheats and hacks. People who want a brand 5, 10, 20 years from now, they're building for the future, they start now. I don't think you can get away without focusing on brand if you still want to be in business that far ahead,
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, fantastic, Despina. Thank you so much for your insights. That was incredibly practical and honestly a bit eye-opening in some cases. And to our listeners, check out Despina's work on Ahrefs blog. It was amazing. When I was preparing for this podcast, I checked some articles, and the article that we've talked about today, I enjoy it. Your writing style is so amazing. I enjoy like every sentence that I read. Thank you so much for doing this. Continue doing. You're very good at this. Thank you so much. And also, I want our listeners to comment something. Have you ever caught an AI hallucinating about your brand or your clients? And what's the most bizarre ChatGPT has ever confidentially claimed about your business? So share your stories in the comments below. Subscribe to Adsy Talks, and we'll see you in the next episodes. Bye.
This is Adsy Talks.